Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HCC Media, St. Louis's home for arts, education, and culture.
There's something very special that we're trying to tell.
We need to wake up a little bit and see what's here.
Keeping its story alive, that's important, because otherwise it's going to be lost forever.
Today on Spotlight, the legacy of the Harvey girls at St. Louis Union Station. Plus, what's left of the largest showboat to ever travel the Mississippi. And then the Bandstand in Forest Park, what it is and why it's there. But first, inside a building, bringing new ideas to an old area of St. Louis. It's Sunday and you're watching the Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
At the corner of 7th and Olive in downtown St. Louis, you'll find an old building 16 stories tall with a new story to tell.
There's something very special that we're trying to tell. We're trying to evoke sort of the feeling that travelers got 150 years ago.
The old Union Trust building has been turned into the new Hotel St. Louis, restored by Restoration St. Louis, the same company that turned the Coronado Hotel into apartments and the Moolah Temple into a theater. But to reimagine this building took a lot of imagination.
You don't spend $65 million if it doesn't need a major overhaul. Everything needed to be replaced.
After 3 years of hard work, Hotel St. Louis had its soft opening at the end of 2018.
Yay, isn't that awesome? Finally, so exciting.
When the Union Trust building opened in 1893, it housed offices, not bedrooms. So turning it into a hotel required the Gills to keep in mind the principle that form follows function. Not just because it makes sense, but because that old adage was coined by the architect who designed the original Union Trust building, Louis Sullivan.
Everything about Louis Sullivan buildings was always very functional. And once he made sure of the functionality, then he went crazy with ornamentation.
The Gills tried to save lots of those frills and flourishes, restoring what they could and recreating what they could not. A lot of the original plaster was missing, and so was most of the original stained glass skylight, now being recreated by a local artist one panel at a time. They have also reopened the original mezzanine, which had been enclosed during a previous remodeling job. And since the original building had a rooftop bar, they are also bringing that back.
It's all about a sense of not being like this kind of stodgy, old, historic kind of place, but more, I feel like it's more about making it exciting and fun for people.
Along with restoring the building, the Gills want Hotel St. Louis to help restore the city's image by giving out-of-towners a uniquely local experience. The guest room minibars are loaded with St. Louis-made treats. Visitors are also issued metal water bottles to let them know St. Louis has the best tap water in the country. There are arches in the headboards and fleur-de-lis in the carpets. The rooms also come furnished with record players, so guests can listen to albums recorded by bands with a St. Louis connection.
This isn't just another hotel. This is exactly like nothing else.
And that includes the restaurant, called Union 30, a nod to the building's original name and status as one of only 30 remaining Louis Sullivan buildings. Union 30's menu is peppered with some of St. Louis's favorite dishes, including one that is literally famous, thanks to Chef Matt Birkenmeyer, who was asked to recommend a chef who knows St. Louis cuisine.
So I said, yeah, sure, I might know a few people. I went home, and I'm like, duh. I'm interested in this. This sounds like a really cool thing.
The idea of revisiting the famous of St. Louis Also includes the meeting rooms, which bear the names and likenesses of some of St. Louis's most celebrated former residents. Even the door hangers have local flair, with two of them reflecting the city's baseball royalty, while another celebrates the vernacular of the commoner.
It's a hotel, not a theme park. So I want to tread that fine line between, crazy theme park, right, and really beautiful hotel with really interesting and fun things to do.
Some of the local tales they tell here are subtle, like these custom-built tables with legs meant to look like I-beams, which were invented by Louis Sullivan, or the roses in the lobby, an homage to Henry Shaw, the founder of the Missouri Botanical Garden. His townhouse once stood where Hotel St. Louis stands now.
The experience that you get when you stay here is St. Louis.
When it comes to hotels, there are plenty of beds available in St. Louis. But a stay at Hotel St. Louis also comes with bedtime stories.
We're trying to tell a special story here, trying to tell the story of what St. Louis used to be and what it can be.
Scan the QR code on your screen to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
What do the Old West, trains, fine food, and St. Louis Union Station have in common? Author Stephen Freed will tell you Fred Harvey and his Harvey Girls.
The Harvey Company in its heyday was the largest hospitality business in the world.
Freed wrote Fred Harvey's biography, Appetite for America, and describes the transplanted Englishman as Ray Kroc before McDonald's and J.W. Marriott before Marriott Hotels. Harvey started his first restaurant in St. Louis in the late 1850s.
And then he got out of the business for a number of years. And then in his early 40s decided to get back into it because he traveled the railroads a lot.
What Fred Harvey found as he traveled out west during the glory days of train travel was that the food was terrible at each stop.
Keep in mind, there weren't Union stations then. Railroads had their own tracks, their own stations.
Harvey believed that clean, well-organized restaurants with good food and efficient service would lure travelers. The owners of Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Rail Line agreed, and the first chain of Harvey restaurants were built with some 60 locations in what was considered cowboy country.
And so they started very small, just in Kansas. They expanded into Colorado, into New Mexico, into Arizona, and then all the way across to the Pacific.
But the men hired to serve along the railway didn't meet Harvey's high standards. His next innovative idea was recruiting educated young women called Harvey Girls.
You had to be a little special. You couldn't just be run-of-the-mill.
94-year-old Mary Spiller of Afton was just 17 years old in 1944, the youngest to be hired as a Harvey Girl along with her older sister. It was wartime, and Union Station was teeming with troops.
We would be waiting on some soldiers, and we're giggling and going on, and Mr. Parker would walk by and he'd stamp his finger, get going,
In 1946, the release of the George City movie, The Harvey Girls, starring Judy Garland, cemented their legendary status.
The Harvey system, I must say, primarily pertains to the absolute perfection in the way we feed the trains.
Perfection in the dining room, perfection in the dorm. We even want perfection in the Harvey uniform.
These were wholesome girls from the Midwest and East Coast who served patrons in nun-like uniforms. Harvey Girls helped bring a bit of sophistication to all of Fred Harvey's restaurants, particularly to the untamed West.
You don't blow on your suit. You fan it with your hat.
Oh. Black shirt waist, cuffs neat and trim. The apron must be spotless from the collar to the hem.
And from the 1880s through the 1940s, 100,000 single women in America had this experience.
Wherever a Harvey house appears, civilization is not far behind.
Harvey Girls were true pioneers in the 1870s when few single women traveled or worked outside the home.
They were adventurous women when you think about it.
St. Louis Union Station historian Darlene Minetti says following the Great Depression of the late 1800s, the economy was rebooted. That led to St. Louis building the first major Union Station in the country in 1894. Fred Harvey was hired to service the entire building, from retail stores to his signature restaurants. It was his only business that was not situated along the Santa Fe Railway.
The Station Grill was one, if not the Harvey restaurant.
Correct, it was the main one. But up until the Depression, it was thriving. At the Depression, we had to close it, sad to say. But it reopened in 1960 because it was more for the locals at that point.
Imported linens and tableware along with prime steak was a classic Harvey trademark.
One steak, very rare.
Not everyone could become a Harvey girl. It was something of a status symbol. They had to be single between the ages of 17 and 30, be able to travel, and sign a 6-month contract. They also went through some rigorous training.
They were very strict about what you did, the way you did it, and everything.
In 2019, during the 125th anniversary of St. Louis Union Station, Mary returned to the place that meant so much to her so many years ago.
And it always was special in my life.
She kept an ashtray and her uniform bow tie, but Mary says her older sister left with much more.
There was a soldier that was transferred, and she waited on him one day, and he was stationed at Jefferson Barracks, and she wound up marrying him.
While Fred Harvey may not be a familiar name to many, the contribution of his Harvey girls along with St. Louis Union Station may be his lasting legacy in the Gateway City.
The apron must be spotless and must have the proper swirl. That's the first requirement of a Harvey girl.
You just never know where that spark is going to come from.
You're putting a human touch to everything through the vehicle of art. We give them the ability to hope.
The Goldenrod Showboat was a fixture on the St. Louis riverfront for decades. But today, all that remains of the largest showboat ever to travel the Mississippi River is jammed into a couple of storage lockers in Jerseyville, Illinois.
Got a sample here of some of the old wallpaper from the showboat. They've got sheet music in here. The big chandelier from the theater is right here. You know, telling the story about it, you know, it makes me light up because it's Americana. It's history that you cannot replicate anywhere else. We have all the stage lights from the showboat.
Jake Medford was never on the showboat in its heyday. He's only 27 years old. But much of his youth has been spent getting to know the Goldenrod in her dotage.
When I got involved and started getting on board more and more, that's when you really fall in love with the place, and it was just amazing.
By day, Jake runs his family's gas stations and serves as the minister at Jerseyville's Church of Christ. But much of his free time is spent saving the Goldenrod's soul.
It had a rough life going throughout history, but the amazing thing is these showboats were built to last roughly 10 to 15 years. That's all they would last. But this one lasted, you know, much, much longer.
She endured crashes, fire, and foreclosure, and yet the Goldenrod continued cruising through 15 states from 1909 until 1937, when she docked in St. Louis for repairs and ended up staying for more than 50 years. Then, in 1989, the city of St. Charles bought the Goldenrod and moved the showboat to their riverfront. But within a few years, the need for expensive repairs brought down the curtain. In 2008, the Goldenrod was donated to the St. Louis-based Historic Riverboat Preservation Association, and they moved it to a private mooring in Campsville, Illinois, hoping to raise enough money to bring the Goldenrod back to life. And Campsville is where Jake Medford, who was 19 at the time, first discovered the Goldenrod when he and a friend thought it would be fun to climb aboard and take pictures.
Once we took the photos, that's when we started taking time to look up the history. And the more that him and I did research on it, we were attracted to it more and more.
Jake got in touch with the preservation group to see if they wanted any of his pictures. Turned out what they needed was someone who lived near the boat to be its caretaker. Jake got the job.
We kept a sample of each glass that was on the showboat.
The idea was to try to keep the boat intact while raising money to restore it. But in 2014, while trying to reposition the boat at the mooring site, the hull was damaged beyond repair. And that's when the decision was made to start removing all the artifacts.
We have some of the costumes still. A lot of people will recognize some of this from the ceilings. Apparently another prop, you know.
Once all the artifacts had been removed, the plan was to dismantle the rest of the boat, store the lumber, and someday rebuild it. But on October 26, 2017, that plan was dashed when the Goldenrod mysteriously caught fire.
I was lost. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I know things don't go out with dignity, but that was just horrible.
A few spent fireworks were found around the boat, but no one has ever really figured out what caused it to burn.
We kept everything we could. This is an old menu.
Now the plan is to find a museum interested in exhibiting what remains of the grandest showboat ever to travel the rivers of America.
Keeping its story alive, that's important, because otherwise it's going to be lost forever. I never gave up on it, no. And that's why I'm still here.
A new look at old downtown St. Louis later on Spotlight.
If you've ever been to Forest Park, chances are you've seen this. Heck, you might have even stopped and posed for a picture in front of it. But did you ever stop and wonder just what it is and why it's there?
Behind me is the Nathan Frank Bandstand.
The bandstand was built in 1876, the same year Forest Park opened, and was used as a venue for musicians to hold public concerts. It was renovated for the 1904 World's Fair and remained in use for several years after.
Early part of the 1900s, that bandstand, which was made of wood, suffered from both weather, from fires, and in around 1910, 1911, it was actually closed down because it was not thought to be safe.
The site then stood empty, that is, until 1924, when a man by the name of Nathan Frank came along.
Nathan Frank was a prominent St. Louisan. He was an attorney, he was a businessman. He was a member of Congress, of United States Congress. He also was one of the people that helped to bring the World's Fair to St. Louis in 1904.
Nathan Frank was also one of the earliest supporters of Forest Park and one of its earliest benefactors, donating about $50,000 to build the bandstand we see today. This new bandstand is slightly less ornate than the original. It's made of marble rather than wood to cut down on the chances of future fires. And while it's no longer used by musicians, it remains to this day one of the jewels of Forest Park.
For content that keeps you coming back for more, go to HCCmedia.org. Be entertained. Get inspired. Learn something new. Connect with your community. Go in depth with experts. And your favorite authors. For original programming and award-winning content, go to HCCmedia.org.
Seeing one of these in a grocery store is quite common. Seeing one on top of a house is not. Welcome to the Onion House in Tower Grove South.
It was nicknamed the Onion House. The previous owner tells us for 3 reasons. The onion dome, the many layers that it has on every surface in the house, just from people building up materials, and then also the ability for it to make you cry when you know how much money you have to sink into it.
Meet homeowners Kirsten and Patrick Combe. They are renovating and restoring the home with some help from federal and state historic tax credits.
We kind of ripped it of its insides, and we are putting in all new life into it.
For one of them, this house was love at first sight.
When I met him, he was telling me about an exciting old home that he had found that he was in the midst of closing on.
I fell in love with it right when I found it. It had an empty lot next door, and as a gardener and a chicken farmer and all the above, it made sense to me.
As soon as I came and did a walkthrough, I thought he was pretty crazy because it was in pretty rough shape.
The onion dome is quite common in other parts of the world. It's usually associated with Russian architectural style, but it's also used in churches in European countries like Germany.
It was built in 1892 by a German cabinet maker that came here from Bremen, Germany, named Gebhard Ludwig, and he came with his family.
They took the boat over from Germany, landed, found this lot, which was being sold by the Russell coal mines.
The adjoining lot, which is actually empty right now and we own it, was the lot of his son, Leonhard.
It stayed in their family for almost 50 years, and then the house actually started getting split up into three, so from a mansion to apartments.
Tearing down walls proved to be somewhat of a treasure hunt.
We found a bunch of weird things in the house. So there's a whole newspaper. This was the German Post-Dispatch equivalent, basically. This is 1930s, a little coffee tin. These are kind of fun. These are just like the nails they used to use, so they man-made nails, right? So these are square. You can see the edges on them.
And we've pulled back lots of hand-painted wall covering and lots of things from the arts and crafts movement around that time period.
Once it's complete, the house will be 7 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, and the rear building will be an Airbnb.
The layout is extremely odd, so it's hard to figure out how they originally had it because we've got 3 staircases in different locations, a full basement, a full attic, 3rd floor.
It's a house that's already kind of a big deal.
Came with its own email address.
And now it even has its own Instagram page with over 19,000 followers.
Which is really cool.
From the Ludwigs to the Combs, a new layer of history is starting to show through by transforming this old onion into one that's just a little sweeter.
The old was just done a little different. It was done a little more thoughtful, and when you see the fun edges and the detail on the carpentry, it's just something that you don't see anymore. And when you have it and it's yours, it's nice to look at and feel like you're connected to the past.
You can find the stories featured in today's show along with past episodes and more at hecmedia.org/spotlight.
Why go downtown at all? Who needs to go downtown at all?
Well, Nene Harris did.
When I was 13, I got permission to take the Gravoy bus downtown, and I would just walk all over downtown. And I fell in love with it.
And now, Nene Harris has written a tell-all book about her love affair, which covers the Central City's history from its founding through its floundering and all its many rebirths.
Its history is so remarkably layered and so rich that when you walk the streets today, you get bits and pieces of all these different heydays. You see all these different parts of the life of downtown.
Harris tells a lot of the story through the architecture of downtown St. Louis, which tells its own story of the European immigrants who settled in St. Louis.
They came from 1,000 years of learning how to build cities. They so respected what was good about where they came from and brought the best with them, and that you can see throughout our city. The breakthrough was Louis Sullivan's Wainwright Building, which showed the world how to build tall. And, you could build taller and taller, but spiritually, it just didn't celebrate height. And with the Wainwright Building, St. Louisans celebrated the fact that we could now build tall.
To Nene Harris, the story of downtown St. Louis is about much more than buildings. It's about people, those who lived here, those who moved here, and even some celebrities who visited here and told the world about what they saw, including Charles Dickens.
He stayed at the Planters Hotel and he talked about the luxury of the hotel. He had never seen transoms over doors before that. That was new to him. He talked about the old French section of the riverfront and how it already in the early 1840s when he visited here, it had an ancient feel, a sense of antiquity about it. People forget, for the first 100 years, all of St. Louis, except for a little settlement here or there, it was all downtown.
The book also includes the story of the Great Fire of 1849 that destroyed a huge portion of downtown St. Louis. It started on a riverboat that then broke loose from its moorings.
And the current pushed it against riverboat after riverboat until 23 riverboats were aflame, and then the fire spread to the riverbank. And 15 blocks of downtown St. Louis burned.
Ultimately, the fire led to a rebuilding that improved the riverfront and began to push residential areas to the west, which led to the building of one of the city's first great neighborhoods, called Lucas Place.
One of the things I'd like to encourage people to do is look through the book and don't read the captions under the architectural features and architectural photos. And people who really know downtown don't know where they came from. They can't recognize it. And the reason we can't recognize it is because our downtown has so much detail and so much beauty and so much entertainment to it that you can keep studying it and keep studying and keep walking these streets, and there will always be something that surprises you.
Every generation of St. Louisans probably has had something they loved about downtown disappear in their lifetime. But we also tend to take for granted all the things that come along to animate new heydays in different parts of town. Thankfully, there are people who write it all down so we can see what we missed and what we still miss, even when it's right in front of us.
It's almost an exotic place now, and the curiosity is so many people from other places are recognizing it before St. Louisans recognize it. So we need to wake up a little bit and see what's here, because it's a very exciting time.
Next week, an emergency room physician explores how service taught her how to heal herself, plus helping the community create thanks to the Foundry and Made Makerspace. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.